I found myself invited to give birth to an organization that ended up never seeing the light of day for different reasons. But it was an organization with the intention to do what maps do, but focused on societal change, leadership development, innovation kind of stuff. And this is 5 years ago. And to explore that organization, 7 people were invited to a place in Germany where we just explored that. Like, what does it want to become? And we did a bunch of ceremony work. And then at some point, for a psilocybin ceremony, I do not remember who suggested it, but someone suggested, why don't we just, what if we have a shared intention? So the same thing that we're doing here, basically. And then that became organizational design. Like, how could that look? So it's also very much kind of the precursor to what we've been doing here. And that's also why I've been waiting since then for this. First, I waited for 3 years just knowing, like, okay, this practice will happen, but it's not time yet. Like, I've found it, but it's not time yet. And now we're here. So I'll skip the details of all the download and yada yada, blah blah blah. I was gifted a pattern, which was basically the seed of life pattern turned into a torus, just like this thing. And the RCO can be described partly from that perspective, like it's a toroidal energy field. It's a circular regenerative system. If we look at biology, it's the seed of life. If we look at spiritual, sacred geometry, that kind of thing. So I'll take a stab at just trying to describe it, and maybe leaving out details, like all the legal stuff. I should also mention, so the channeling of the pattern came through this collective, but primarily through me as the channel. And then I brought it home, and then my co-explorer and best friend Amit, who is very much part of all of this, even though not all of you have met him. He and I just started working from there. And then very synchronistically over the course of like 3.5 years, like different additional pieces of the puzzle came in, like other models. There's a previous Swedish one called the companization model that we borrowed certain things from. And there's a British one, and I can't remember the name of it right now, that we also borrowed certain pieces from, and then it just magically kind of came together. And then we found legal counsels. It took like 3 tries to get someone to actually try it with us and not just like not do it. And then 2 years ago, probably, we just set up the first RCO in Sweden. But I'll speak through why it was easy to set up is that it's using legal entities that already exist in almost all legal jurisdictions around the world. It's most likely viable almost everywhere. The way it works, question in the middle. So initially it was a purpose in the middle, but then during our journey we found that if you reframe or rephrase a purpose statement into a question, something magical happens. So instead of it becoming a mountaintop you're trying to climb, and you're like, you've never succeeded until you get there. It's like, we're gonna save 10,000 lives. It's like, you failed until you hit 10,000. The question is a horizon. You're never gonna answer it. Like if it's a well-formulated, truly important question, it's unanswerable, but it's important to keep moving towards the horizon, but it moves with you. And Amit sometimes speaks of it as a northern star. And he says, like, we're in a sailboat, we're moving towards the horizon. A northern star, which is a question, is guiding us. You cannot reach a star in a sailboat. It's not the point of it. It's not to get there. It's just to stay guided by it. So the core, the first part of the RCO, an RCO is a question, an important question. That is placed in the middle. And then a protective layer of human beings is set up around the question. And they're just there to make sure that we stay focused on the question. And that comes in the form of a non-profit association. It can also be in the form of a foundation, but we prefer a non-profit association because it's alive. It's not a thing that owns itself, it's actually human beings. But it's non-profit, so there's no financial individual interest by being a member of the non-profit association. And they're just safeguarded and do non-profit association stuff around the question, whatever that may be. Could be holding conferences or doing research or that kind of stuff. It's its own entity, so it's like it's in itself connected to the question. And then in the basic model, the fundamental model, you add one company selling mushrooms. That it basically sits here. I'll place it here, but there's an overlap to the non-profit association. So this is a normal non-profit association. This is a normal limited company, and they are both legally bound to the question. So from the question, you create we call it a source code, but it's basically a constitution. It's a short text document that basically stipulates the question, stipulates any guiding principles that are important, and if there are any specific structures or processes that needs to be honored in this. But basically the question and the principles will get you fairly far. From that text document, you tie both this organization and this organization to that document. So all legal documentation in this one and all legal documentation in the company are bound to the same source code document. So if that changes, everything changes. And you can change it. Either by everyone just being in agreement, then you can just change it instantly. Or if there's a lot of people in the structure, it takes longer, then you need like 2 annual meetings to make changes to the source code document. And a company can't decide to change it without the nonprofit agreeing to it. So you can't just change the purpose, the question, mid-air. That's one part of it. Then there's also a legal binding or binding between the company and the nonprofit association, which can be set up in a few different ways. So the RCO is pretty modular. Like you can choose which parts of it you want, and you can do certain things in different ways. The way we're doing it in Sweden right now is that we give 10% shareholding or shares, 10% of the shares in the form of preferred shares from the company into the non-profit association. So the association owns what is in Sweden known as a minority stake that comes with certain protection rights in Germanic jurisdiction, which is the Swedish one. So there's that. Those preferred shares, that shareholding gives special rights. So it gives 10% liquidation and dividend rights, which is standard. But it also stipulates that the non-profit association elects half of the board in the company. And I know that, or I've learned that in the US, you can't have an even number in a board. I'm not sure if that's true or not. You can. You can. Okay, you can. So, and in Europe you can. So half the board is elected by the nonprofit association. It doesn't have to mean that it's members from the nonprofit association. These people just decide, these people should be here because we think they can represent purpose. And the idea is basically to just create a constant dialogue between these two logics. So like they have to be in dialogue and conversation, and like there's that energetic, just like pushing and pulling, if you will. A detail that's important there is that it's still the company side, like founders, shareholders, investors, who elect the chairman of the board. So they still have a deciding vote. That's in Europe at least. So the nonprofit can't tell the company what to do, but they can tell them what not to do, and they can just mess with them if they want to. If they're just like off target, they can be like, fuck you, and let's have a conversation. We're not going to get there. We're going to vote and vote and vote and vote and vote. There are more details to this, but I'll leave that for now. You can also design specific veto rights into this, the preferred shares, which is also like optional. In our RCO, we've chosen the veto right. The the one that's important, really important, is that I already mentioned. Like this one can't change the purpose without this agreeing to it. The other thing that we've added is this: you can't make changes to the shareholder agreement without these people saying okay to it. So basically, you can't bring in any investor without these people saying, yeah, we think they can, we think they're good guys. But that's optional. Okay, so next part is an add-on, which we love, but you don't have to do. It's a life cycle. So the life cycle is basically stipulating that we look at this as nature. So we look at these as little plants growing in the soil here, with kind of this being the groundwater. And as this plant grows, initially, when it's in, we call it the seed stage, it needs a lot of energy. Like it needs its parents, the founders. It needs energy from investors and resources because it needs to start growing, and there's a lot of energy going into it. At a certain point, it will start maturing. That's when founders become usually a little less important, stuff like that. And it doesn't require just as much energy as possible. Like it's self-sustaining all of a sudden. You can translate that to financial terms, and you decide what those are. But it could, for instance, be when we have a $5 million turnover and we're cash flow positive, we're in a matured state. When that happens, if you choose to do the life cycle, you say, okay, from now on, we're going to send a little bit of energy back from this into the center. And you decide what that is. It's like 10% of profits or whatever. You decide at that moment. And that means that this entity, now making money as a business, selling mushrooms, while honoring this question, whatever that is, can start funding the question. So it sends energy back that this structure basically decides what to do with. And this structure is all about supporting the question. So it could be fund more companies, it could be fund research, it could be anything that moves towards the question. So it's starting to become regenerative with energy moving back into it. Then as this progresses, there's it matures and kind of pans out, and then it withers away, and eventually it needs to get composted, right? Yeah, I'll talk about the composting first. So when an RCO wants to be composted, like this can be composted into this, and then this is still here. But if the whole thing wants to be composted, because there's no energy anymore, like no one cares about this question, or it's not formulated in the right way, or something else is just taking people elsewhere, the whole thing can get composted. And the way you do it is that if there's any resources left, or sufficient resources to make this a viable thing to do, as in money or resources, then the whole thing shifts. So the non-profit association decides to disintegrate and reshape itself into a time-limited foundation. So it's time-limited, so it's not an evergreen, so some legal advisor in Switzerland just gets rich forever. So at that time, you decide, what is the time? Is it 5 years? Is it 20 years? What is it? It's up to the people to decide. And then all the remaining resources during that time span must be redistributed into the surrounding ecosystem at that point in time, which could be 100 years from now. It's like whatever makes sense from what we were doing here, whatever is now in the environment, how do we honor this question? By just sending out energy to other entities, new plants springing up, which could be anything. It's once again, it's the people at the time making the decision, because it's contextual. You can't sit now and make a decision for 100 years into the future, because you don't know what it's going to be like. That's that. And then the final, maybe not the final, but my favorite part of it is that you can add more companies selling weed and cacao. So I'm curious what the question here is.
Fun things to ingest.
Exactly.
Could the cacao beans also be a nonprofit? Or is it all companies?
It could be a nonprofit. We haven't explored it though. So there's a lot of use cases and a lot of legal jurisdictions we have not explored yet. And like I said, it's modular. But in this thing, it turns into an entire ecosystem, like a meadow. So all of a sudden you have different companies, different founders, different business logic, but all working towards the same question. So let's say all of us have a company each towards the same question. We set them up, and they're not directly connected to each other. So this can, die without interfering with this, but they're all connected to the same central structure. So it's like they're indirectly connected. And then, like so far, there's one RCO with 2 companies in it. So it's like we haven't gotten that far yet. But the idea is at least that once you have a lot of these, you can do things together. Like you can share certain resources and centralize certain services that maybe all the companies need. It most likely turns into a community of ambassadorship. Like, of course, we're going to support each other's companies because we know that we're in alignment. And we know that if you do well, you got to fund the question. And if my company goes to shit here, there's a lot of people and things here that I could still do things with. I might get hired by this company, or there might come funding here to my new company. And even as just a member in the nonprofit association, even if you don't have a company, you're not getting any financial returns just by me being a member. But if there's money in the system and you want to do something and create something towards the question, you might just get funding to start it. With the membership thing, you can set up if you need like specific rail guards for who can become a member, or if it's just wide open. What we do to make sure that there's no hostile takeover, like 100,000 people coming into this, becoming members and just trying to do bad stuff with it, is that you can, and this is in Sweden at least, it's an important aspect of why it's a non-profit association and not a for-profit association or an economic, in Sweden it's called an economic association, is that in a non-profit you can have different types of memberships. So what we do then is we say, we can give special memberships to people working in these companies, for instance. So you're a partner. So if you're inside of this company or inside of this company or inside of this company, you can have a specific membership class that have, if there's a weighted voting, like if we can't do the consensual stuff and we really have to vote, we can say all these partnership members have more to say than all the general members. So if there's 100,000 general members and 2 partnership members, they still decide because they are more deeply connected to this thing, because they're actually working inside of the structure. They're not just like a support. Okay, I'll stop there. There's probably more, but.
Can you share a little bit more just about the nonprofit? Is there a council, or is it every member has a vote and how it makes?
Yeah. So
Is it a DAO or can it be a DAO?
we're pretty sure it can be a DAO. We've started exploring it, like with Haifa, if you're familiar with Haifa. Haifa is like a DAO for DAOs company. But we haven't gone, we're pretty sure it works, but we haven't really gone into it. But it's fairly likely that it would work combined with the DAO. But that needs more exploration. The nonprofit association, in Sweden, you actually have a board of a nonprofit association that's elected by its members. So it's good that you bring that up, because with the board in the nonprofit association, that basically means you don't have to vote for every single thing. It's like you choose your board members. But if you're a board member in the nonprofit association, you cannot be a board member in one of the companies. It's an important distinction to make, because then you're sitting on 2 chairs and it gets messy, like profit, nonprofit. But once again, you can use a foundation instead of a nonprofit association. There are probably other legal forms you could use as well. So the way it has kind of evolved is into this kind of modular thing that can shift a little bit depending on the context.
And the decision making is made by the board. So essentially members elect the board and the board
Make decisions, exactly.
In some ways it kind of works like a DAO.
Yeah, it's fairly similar, which means the DAO should work. And then so far where we are in our exploration, to say a little bit about that, is that we set up our own RCO, and we did it in Sweden because we know there was like a prejudice that we could lean on. So we didn't even ask for permission. Just like, we're just setting up these things and just connecting them slightly different in a way that we know is okay within the law. Just no one had done it before. So it just all went through, like no issues whatsoever. So obviously it's easier in it's easiest to do when you start something up. Like if you already have a huge structure, then everyone, all the shareholders need to agree to shift into an RCO structure, which you can do, but it might be tricky. We've set up our own. We're obviously exploring this with you and a bunch of other people. And then we're also in process of, we'll see if it plays out or not, but we're like made a lot of progress working with a few big companies in Sweden, but big international companies. So it's Volvo Cars, Microsoft, and a few others they have decided to create a shared startup in the impact space. And they were looking for a way to do it because it's tricky for these big companies to be like, it's a purpose-driven shared startup with really big entities around it. How do they do that? So we've gone through a process with them where they've decided to do an RCO. And we've gone through like 90% of the process, and then we'll see if it wants to fully happen or not. But that's like just additional information, kind of where we are in the exploration. All right, I'm stopping again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's the mushrooms, that is not us. So, yeah, they came up with it.